guys, welcome back to Room 237, and before I get to the Giallo review of this video, just to kind of give you guys a heads up of what is left for Giallo films, because it's not many. I actually have all of them in front of me. There is one coming because a friend surprised me through a message on Instagram, so when that comes in, I'll do an unboxing. But even with that, there's only 6 Gialli left, including that, the pickups from this week, and the one I'll be doing for this video. So, what's to come is I picked up another one from Raro Video, Death Occurred Last Night, which is also kind of a blend of Polizieschi film, as is the brand new Mondo Macabro Blu-ray release, which came out last week, of The Designated Victim. I also picked up this DVD of a 90s Giallo, Fatal Frames, by Synapse. And I had already reviewed this film, but I did not own it, and it is Argento's Sleepless. Great movie, great Giallo. So those, and then the one that's coming in the mail from a friend, that a video for that will be up. But the Giallo for this video, which very fittingly, because it's the last one I have by this director, and so it fits that the last Giallo I have to review from him is also actually widely considered to be his last truly great film, and it's Dario Argento in his 1996 film, The Stendhal Syndrome, which actually, now that I bought Sleepless, the only film of his I do not own is Phantom of the Opera, which I have reviewed as well. If we're not counting that comedy he did back in like the 70s. I don't even remember the name of it. But, so yeah, Stendhal Syndrome, and I don't update my library often, but this is one I will, because this is just a really kind of crappy trauma release. I'd much rather have the Blue Underground release. I only picked this up because I had never seen it in front of me before, and it was cheap, so I just picked it up. It says the director's cut. Now, I've heard people say it is 2 hours on the dot. This is 113 minutes. I don't know if they're rounding or if there actually is a 120-minute cut out there, but either way. And yeah, this does not have the features that Blue Underground has. It does have a little intro by Lloyd Kaufman, so if you're into that. But anyway, so yeah, many people consider this to be, well, it's debatable between Trauma from '93 and this. I think most people can agree it's one of those two, but this one definitely has sort of that distinction of being the end of his streak, his 26-year streak of just, at the very least, solid films. I mean, from 1970s, Bird with the Crystal Plumage, up until 1996, every movie he's had, again, other than that comedy that's kind of been forgotten, it has just been, you know, kind of been compared to like the Italian John Carpenter, because the 80s was just packed with just great movie after great movie. Even his lesser, not as well received films like Inferno, which, yeah, was not well received upon release, was loved by genre fans and has become a cult film and an Argento favorite for many people. So, and also the reason why people say the last great film is because, also like Carpenter, it wasn't so much of like a dip in quality as much as it was a fucking plummet. I mean, the movie after this was Phantom of the Opera, arguably his worst film so far. I still have to see what is often regarded as his worst films, Dracula and Mother of Tears. I have reviewed Giallo, which is also up there, but... So anyway, right off the bat, I have to say this is, narratively speaking, probably his most ambitious film. It's really hard to explain, really. But it stars his daughter, Asia Argento, which the previous film, Trauma, I did criticize her acting. I was not a fan of her performance. That is redeemed 100% in this. This is like a Taxi Driver performance where she carries the entire movie by herself. And it is a descent into madness type film. I think this was a very personal film for Argento because it is sort of built around this real syndrome that a French, I actually had to pull it up. I think it was a French doctor named Stendhal who had similar symptoms where people go into a fugue state with delusions or hallucinations or possibly premonitions or anxiety or whatever that is brought on by art. And I guess when Argento was very young, he was touring Athens and he was climbing the steps of the Parthenon, if I pronounce that correctly, and he was overcome by a trance and he was lost for hours. So he's kind of had this base idea in his back pocket since he was a child. And there's been books about it. I mean, there was a book by Graziella Mogherini, who wrote a book about the syndrome, and I'm sure there's more to it. If you're more interested, feel free to look it up. All I know is that it puts you into a trance and, you know, a very deeply emotional hallucinations, almost dreamlike hallucinations in a fugue state. And that's sort of what it's built around. Also, it really toys with the formula of Giallo, which, I mean, the guy that reinvented the wheel of the genre. It's very fitting that he mixes it up this much because it's not a whodunit like your typical Giallo film. Instead, more of, I mean, there is a twist at the end, but we know who the perpetrator is from the very beginning. And it is more of this stalker coming after the protagonist, but it's more so a victim story. It's not about the mystery of who is killing these people or this person, but more so just what this trauma does to someone. And it has themes of, you know, gender dissatisfaction or gender roles, because the things that Asia Argento is subjecting herself to. Before I get into any of that, just the essentials, I guess, which we have two actors who are known for their rather roles in rather extreme films. Like we have Paolo Bonicelli, who was the Duke in Salò, 120 Days of Sodom. We have Thomas Kretschmann, who's our antagonist. He was actually the guy that, which this is a film that there goes that. A film that I picked up recently that I still need to get to, German film Cannibal, which I'm still very eager to check out. We also have roles by Marco Leonardi, Luigi Diberti, and I know some of these other names, like, who was it? Veronica Lazar? Was she the one that I'm thinking of? Probably not. Well, she was Mother Tenebrarum in Inferno. She was in The Beyond. But anyway, we have music by Ennio Morricone, and this is up there with Phenomena for one of my favorite scores of an Argento film. And I mean, that was Goblin, but I really like the score in this film. And it's a mixture of just really good music with sort of like the child, like, melody of like Deep Red. It's a very well done score. I know that originally Bridget Fonda was up for the role of Anna because she loved Suspiria, and but because of the cost to hire her, and because originally supposed to shoot in Phoenix, but having to shoot in Italy, it didn't work out. But Argento also looked into Jennifer Jason Leigh and Daryl Hannah. I think all of those, except for Daryl Hannah, could have worked. I mean, especially Jennifer Jason Leigh. We've seen her play traumatized characters before, but Asia Argento really kills it in this. And what were some of the things I was gonna say that Argento, well, I can save that for later. But and the effects, which this is also a big first, was done by why do I always forget his name? But the same guy that did the effects for Phenomena, Demons, Opera, he returns to work with Argento for this. And Franco Casagni. Well, he's the one that worked with the fake blood, but there was another guy that worked in it. Stivoletti is the guy's last name. I just read this article, but I can't remember where all the points were. He's the one that worked on Phenomena, Demons, and Opera. The other guy said that worked with the blood, Casagni, he worked on Body Puzzle. But he was actually the one that suggested digital effects, because this is when CGI was really becoming big. And I'll say I hate CGI as much as the next horror fan, but it depends on how it's used. I mean, if it's used as a tool or an ingredient to make an effect work, like the Hills Have Eyes remake, CGI can be a very good thing. Or if it's just something that there's no way they could really get the shot otherwise. I mean, with this, some of the standout scenes, like Anna, which is Argento. Anna looks at this giant painting and it just melts in front of her, revealing this window that she can cross into this alternate sort of world or this vision. Could they have had it melt practically? Probably, but it adds to the otherworldly, trippy, hallucinatory atmosphere and nature of the film. I feel like if they had done it practically, it wouldn't have looked as dreamlike. It might have looked like the room was too hot. So I forgive it there. Also, a scene where she takes a couple pills and we get like an esophagus POV where we see the pills sort of falling towards the camera, and then it switches. We see him go further down her stomach. Okay, I mean, that's, at least they're doing something kind of inventive with it. But then, like, the scene where it's going over the ocean before it goes into the water to show that vision of her kissing this giant fish, or, no pun intended, the shoddiest of all the CGI, when the killer shoots the one woman in the cheek. It's like slow motion, and it like blasts to her mouth. They could have done that practically, but I get it, they're going for a slow motion. But it leads to a really cool scene where it kind of pans around so you can see through both holes in the cheeks, and then the killer just like looks through one of them, or looks through both, and he's kind of doing this ooh, 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 kind of playing with Anna, who's on the other side of this girl. So yeah, there's some CGI, some very obvious dated CGI, but I can forgive it. It's when you have someone getting shot and the wound and the blood is CGI that I have a problem with. Now, the story is, it gets very confusing for the first chunk of time, like the first half hour, because Anna is this police officer, or this detective, works for the I don't know if they actually come out and say it, but I read somewhere it's like the rape unit or whatever. Or it's just a homicide. She's following up on this serial killer rapist case. And so she thinks she's tracked him down to this museum in Rome, but that's where she is stricken by her Stendhal syndrome, which is where she gets the vision that she's kissing this giant fish, which that's done practically. And I guess that water was freezing. But, so of course she's dizzy and not feeling well, and this handsome blonde guy in a suit helps her to a cab. Helps her to her hotel, I think it is. Gives her a couple pills to help her feel better. He seems very kind and charming. And there she's stricken by more artwork. Like, there's even a scene where she covers this giant painting in her room with a blanket, similar to the mirrors in Phenomena. And then that's when we see it melt, and she crosses over into this dreamlike world, which is very confusing on first time watch, but there is something very interesting, that because it's like this alleyway which is kind of setting up what's going on outside of her body, where she's, you know, being briefed on this case. There's a new victim, but when she walks by, we see the square that she walked through, and we see her room still in there. I thought that was a cool shot. And that's when she takes the pills, you know, shortly before we see them go down. Again, kind of inventive, neat looking, again, strong CGI, but, or obvious, I should say strong, but, and that's when she wakes up and finds the guy, Thomas Kretschmann. Hopefully I keep pronouncing his name correctly. Yeah, Kretschmann. Which is the guy from earlier that helped her. He's on top of her, and we see that he's the one that she's trying to catch. His name is Alfredo. He's the serial rapist and killer. And I thought this was more of the dream, because one thing he does, he cuts her lip because he says, I want to kiss you like how you were in the museum. Because when she first gets Stendhal, when it first starts coming over her, she falls and hits her mouth on something, and her lip bleeds. So he does this thing with the double-sided straight razor where he's like kind of sticking it in the side of his mouth, and and he's like twirling it, like it's like between his cheeks, and he's kind of doing it with his tongue, so it's spinning, but it's moving very fast, almost CGI looking. So I thought it was more just like this monstrous like thing. So I thought it was more of the dream. But he knocks her unconscious. That she wakes up in the car with this other woman, who's the one that gets, that not so great CGI. I mean, it looks cool. You get the muzzle flash, and we zoom in and see the bullet come out. Then we follow the bullet. It kind of goes back, turns around, and we see through both holes in the cheeks. And that's when he looks at Anna through it. He's kind of, ooh. But she is able to escape. Now, for this part of the film, she has very long hair. And that's probably the most confusing, and this is what I mean by the most ambitious narratively, because, I mean, aside from his very good Gialli, Argento is not really known as the story guy or writing. He's the master of visuals, especially like a Suspiria, which arguably has his strongest visuals but the weakest story. Here it's very story driven, and just the way the narrative is, I mean, it does get easier to follow, and I'm sure there's going to be people that, since they're behind a keyboard, they can just say how nothing gets past them, twist or, confusing narratives. I was able to follow it as soon as I heard the title. Yeah, I'm sure. But as the movie goes on, it almost seems as if she can use this syndrome at will, or she can use it whenever she wants. And as the movie goes on, and the more familiar she becomes with the syndrome, the more easier it is to follow. I think that opening chunk was supposed to be jarring and confusing because even she doesn't know what's going on with her. Now, the reason why I say she had very long hair is because one of the first things she does is she cuts it all off, and she gets this very short haircut. And she's pretty much killing the feminine side of herself. She's making herself more masculine. She cuts her hair short. She wears, men's suits. She becomes more androgynous, I guess, but more masculine. Takes up, boxing but also into self-harm and refusing to admit to pain and getting help for injuries. Also just totally blowing off her colleague and boyfriend. I think his name's Marco, which I will say, yes, I get that she's traumatized, but she's terrible to this guy. I mean, like, every time he goes to kiss her, or always just kind of, there's even a scene where, because I think it's implying that she's even adopting these, like, sadistic traits of Alfredo, including his anger. Like, there's a part where she's with Marco in her apartment and talk about how they haven't had sex in a while. So it seems like she's gonna try to seduce him and have sex with him, but she pins him against the wall, and it says like, you wanna fuck, and she's like dry humping him from behind and like kind of hitting him, like really reversing the roles of rape, or like her trauma. She's reversing it, and then throws him to the ground, starts kicking him, and he just leaves. And she is court ordered. She is ordered to see the police psychiatrist, who's played by Salo's Botticelli, who tells her about Stendhal syndrome, and she even says like, "I wanted to fuck him like a man." So she's completely uh, uh, emasculating herself, not emasculating, but sorry I'm stuttering so much as well. And she even tries to visit her family back in Viterbo, I believe is the name of the city. And I know Dario was going for more of like a Jungian type psychology aspect, but there is more Freudian styles, because it shows that her father is very absent and not very supportive, where it hints that Alfredo had a very absent, unloving mother as well. And her brothers kind of make fun of her haircut. She does try to pick up painting as well herself, see if that will help with the syndrome. And all her paintings sort of depict her inner turmoil, like these very black, screaming faces. There's even a part where she's like laying in her apartment and she's just like covered herself in black paint. She's just kind of writhing. Also parts where like when she's at meetings at work, she's like sticking things under her fingernails and just constantly hurting herself. But so, and I think she's becoming more masculine because that's what she feels she needs to track and catch Alfredo. Like he's robbed her of her femininity. I pronounced it fine, but I'm stuttering too much to worry about it. So she's becoming more masculine, and she tries calling some of his survivors, and they seem to have adopted some of his anger. But using a voice changer, he's able to get in touch with her, and then he's able to get her to this sort of abandoned cavern, which has graffiti everywhere, and he ties her to this filthy mattress and keeps her there for I think a couple days, rapes her all over again. But then she's able to get the upper hand. It's kind of cool. She takes the springs, kind of claps against him, and gouges out his eye, shoots him a couple times, turns the tables on things he said to her during this period. It never gets too extreme. It seems to cut at exactly the right moment. Like it's just the right amount of extreme before it becomes too exploitative. So after being stabbed in the neck, having his eye gouged out, shot a couple times, she just kicks him in the river, body goes away, and the police have to try to find it. And then this is where, I guess I should say spoilers, because there is a twist, and normally this would be the halfway point. This would be the end of the film. She's caught the killer or killed the killer. She seems to be putting herself back together. This is the halfway point. We still have like another hour left of this film. And it's pretty interesting. So I'll get into spoilers, but I can definitely see how this is not a film for everybody, whether it be the subject matter, the tending to be convoluted narrative style, or even something as frivolous as like the CGI or even the story itself. But I would agree that this is Argento's last great film. And I would say I liked it more than Trauma. I mean, Trauma was definitely more streamlined. And, he definitely returned to form as far as just the overall look of the film by choosing to shoot in Italy again. his attempts to break out in Hollywood with the previous two films did not really work. But I would say this is his most ambitious to date, if not ever. It can be very confusing, but I also like what he does with the Giallo formula. The biggest standouts is Ossie Argento's performance and Morricone's score. So if you're an Argento fan and you want to see sort of the last sort of the, I mean, up until he gets to this, but there's a couple films in between these two, so this is definitely the end of his streak. But I can see why some people might not like it as well, but I'm gonna get into spoilers, so. So continuing on with spoilers, one, just a fun fact, because I'm sure people will say it in the comments. No one has shot in the museum that Anna goes into. No one was able to shoot in the museum before or since, but Franco Zeffirelli, who I think was the assistant director, he was able to shoot some of the interiors for Tea with Mussolini, which is a semi-autobiographical film 3 years later. But anyway, so after killing Alfredo, she starts to become more feminine again. She wears all white. She dons a long platinum blonde wig, which there are some scenes, and I will say the quality of this, which does kind of, I mean, it's probably like a VHS transfer, but it does also kind of have a TV movie look, but it does have that grit and grain that when she has that blonde wig, and just like the way the shots are and the way she's sitting sometimes, it's very reminiscent of classic 70s Giallo. I'm sure the Blue Underground and Arrow or 88 Films, if there is one, looks a lot cleaner, but no, just a side note. Or if it was a comment, parentheses, people have to use those. Maybe it's also a nod to the Hitchcock ladies, the femme fatale blonde, because that's the twist. She starts to fall in love with this French art student named, I think his name is actually Marie. But, so Alfredo's body has not been found. She's getting some taunting calls and signs that Alfredo is still after her. So she starts to believe that he's still alive. And there's, I think it tries to set up that Marco could be up to no good, because there's, towards the end, there is this sequence where, you know, she has police escort and guards outside her place at all times, and at one point she she's on the phone with her new boyfriend while Marco is there, and he's like listening on the other line. You can tell he's getting upset. But shortly thereafter, Alfredo's body is found, and then that's when Marie is found dead. And then the psychologist is able to put it all together, and which actually, because it was kind of confusing, but So the psychologist goes to talk to her, but then the psychologist ends up dead, and we find out Anna's the killer. Since she killed Alfredo, she sort of adopted his, she feels like, I don't know if it's possession or if like certain elements earlier, like the blood fetish, the anger, the masculinity, but she killed her French boyfriend, she killed her psychiatrist, and it pretty much ends with the police show up. Marco is able to put it together. When he goes to her apartment and sees that psychiatrist is dead already in her apartment, and he goes to take the gun away from her, and she says that I guess she believes it's possession. Alfredo's inside of her. He's ordering her to kill these people, and she kills Marco, and the police try to hold her down and arrest her. She gives another screaming performance, but she's able to get away, and then it ends with her wandering the streets. So, and that's what I mean by, well, one, the Hitchcockian femme fatale blondes, because she ends up being the killer post Alfredo. But I guess that's sort of the twist on the Giallo genre from Argento in this film, is that we know who the rapist and killer is from the beginning, but it's seeing what the trauma does to a surviving victim, and then the twist that the trauma was so severe, and that with them sort of destroying themselves and becoming more and more like the killer, they become a killer themselves. Also, Argento really wanted to make the statement of the relationship between people and art and how they, perceive art. But also, a Margariti's nonfiction book on the Stendhal syndrome and his experiences with the syndrome as well. I will say the first half, even though the narrative is a bit confusing, is a bit stronger. There are times where it does kind of feel like it's dragging. I don't completely hate the CGI. I mean, don't get me wrong, it looks dated, it looks bad. Almost looks like, I don't really want to say Spawn or Mortal Kombat Annihilation bad. It's in the same wheelhouse, but the way they use it and it being 1996, it's forgivable. Great performances. Along with knowing that Jennifer Jason Leigh, Daryl Hannah, and Bridget Fonda were considered for the role of Anna, Julian Sands was also considered for the role of Alfredo. I don't know if a very Aryan look was incidental or on purpose, but I think Kretschmann did have a very psychotic presence. You definitely could feel the sadism that this guy had, so his performance was well done. Loved the score by Ennio Morricone. As far as, and I think this was the first time they've worked together since, oh geez, probably, I don't even remember, either Crystal Plumage or even Cat of Nine Tails. I think it was that early, because I know they kind of had a falling out, and then of course all the scores with Goblin. But yeah, I'm not sure which one I like better. This one definitely feels more like an Argento film than Trauma does. Again, Trauma feels more streamlined and more Hollywood. I definitely see the ambition in this film. definitely call it his most ambitious film. It definitely has a lot of strengths. And, I mean, would it be in the run for a top 10 Argento? Maybe. I mean, I'm going to have like 20, 21 reviews once I've done all his films. So, but it's definitely part of the good half. And yeah, definitely the end of his streak. Because after this, it's Phantom of the Opera, which I've already ranted on that. So, definitely a different Giallo. Definitely a different way to go about it. Just the whole thing about it is ambitious. And I was actually impressed by it. I was surprised. Wasn't quite as convoluted as I expected, but it still had its moments of being confusing. But, you know, like all the other Argento films between this and 1970, still a very solid film. So now I have reviewed all of Dario Argento's Gialli. And the only ones I have left to review are just these three. An anthology and what's considered two of his worst. But I've done all his Giallo films, so that's an accomplishment. But anyway, so stay tuned for the rest of these and the rest of these, as it's the last of the Italian marathon. So stay tuned and thank you for watching.